Hi, this is Dave Darling here. Uh, I got a guest tonight. If you can't see him right now, just look to my side. It's T.R. Hendricks, also known as Tim.
Tim.
He's
Tim's easy.
so
Yeah,
I'm gonna go with Tim for tonight. For this,
please
and
do.
yeah. Now, a lot of people say you don't need an introduction. However, after your service and your years of in the army and as a commander, just as a brief, I'm going to start off with one of the best quotes I think I have found, hands down, for about your novel, and it is crackling with intensity, vivid with authenticity and emotion. Hendricks writes like a knife fight on a moonless night, fast, brutal, and bloody. Thank you so much, Nick Petrie, for that quote.
Nick is the
That's
man. That was my first blurb ever. Nick is like he doesn't know it, but when he sees this, he will. He's like, I consider him like my, writing older brother, I
yeah.
emulate him. He's an awesome guy. We met at Thriller Fest in New York City, two something years ago, I think, and couldn't have been a nicer guy. Was just awesome to me, and I was really honored to get that blurb from him as my first ever
Oh my gosh,
blurb.
yeah.
And when I read it, I was just blown away. So
That
it was awesome.
well
Yeah.
done, Nick. Well, Tim, just give us a brief rundown of before you started writing, and
Yeah.
tell us all about yourself.
All about myself. That's going to be a very short and boring answer. No.
Okay.
No, I mean, I'm New York born and raised. Basically, went into the military after college, served 5 years, did two tours to Iraq in that time, both in Baghdad. After that, I got out, worked in various facets of the private security industry, everything from being an executive protection bodyguard to movie stars in the streets of New York City, up to management of running the entire New York City region for a company, or I was the second in charge. I don't
Right.
want to trump all over my old boss's shoes there.
Yeah.
But I was the second in command to that whole thing. Then I moved on into other areas, private investigation, background screening. But more and more, I gravitated towards the writing side. Even in my professional career, I started doing business communications and proposal writing and stuff like that. And now I have moved on in my day job. I am actually the director of compliance for a business development and consulting firm. And I basically do a little bit of everything for those guys. Like, I mean, that's my main title, but yeah,
Right.
I'll do, social media or communications or even some project management here and there. It's kind of like the good old Swiss Army knife, as it were. So,
Good.
but yeah, that keeps the lights on, keeps the clothes on my back and the kids fed, as it were. But the real passion is the writing and the fun we get to have
Perfect.
with that. Yeah.
Well, before we jump into your debut novel, The Instructor,
Yep.
which, well, right up there, if you've been living under a stump, I believe it came out, was it April?
April 11th,
April 11th. Ah,
2023.
I had one of those dates memorized. So,
Hey, you were in the
so
month. That was good.
yeah, I wasn't too bad.
Hmm.
So after doing some research, I found like you had written other things before The Instructor,
For sure.
and such things. I've heard you have works in fantasy, speculative fiction, military, sci-fi, historical, paranormal fiction. Tell me about all that stuff first in a nutshell. Before
Sure. I
how
mean,
many novels do you got sitting on the shelf there? What's going on?
oh, a lot. I mean, I started like writing this stuff back in like junior high, and
Yeah,
I was always drawn to fantasy novels because it was like the escape of reality, that I enjoy.
Okay.
I liked delving into worlds not of our own, and the more I watched, movies and read books and just was in that particular genre, the more I started cultivating my own ideas, and I don't know, I love the grandeur of the battles, or the single knight
Yeah.
fighting the dragon on a cliffside. That stuff just spoke to me. And I always hesitated writing like contemporary stuff that occurs in our, realm or world or reality, whatever you want to call it. Because I thought it would be too difficult, because you're confined to just, what is in existence. You can't,
Current.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't even go too far with certain inventions and whatnot, because you'll get the eye roll, like, oh, that would
Yeah.
never exist. It's like the Dick Tracy watch, where you could speak into it in the 1950s,
I
and
know.
everybody's like, oh, that's preposterous, it could only exist in a comic book, and now everybody's wearing one. But
Yeah.
I can't wait around 60 years for that to actually show up. So I would just stick with fantasy, and I started writing before I even knew what the hell I was doing. I started in high school, wrote through college, but I didn't know that the industry like gauged you by words. So I set out to write pages,
Okay.
and like I was like, oh, 300 pages, that's a good novel length. Um, Little did I know that my first fantasy work manuscript was like 300 pages of font 11 single spaced,
Oh
Times
my
New Roman.
God.
So who knows how many words that thing is. It's on the back burner to revisit that, but then I got the ideas for another one, then I got the ideas for another one.
Oh
And I
my.
just keep like building into these fantasy stories, and then these other ones would just come to me. Like I was a history major in college,
Okay.
so I love the aspect of, okay, I read a little bit of nonfiction. It's hard to dive into nonfiction these days when you're constantly just trying to keep up with, what your colleagues are putting out, and what you're working on, and all
Yep.
this other stuff. Um, what people are trying to, break into the industry or sending you to read and everything. So I don't get to dive into nonfiction too much, but I was always amazed at like these little snippets of history that's like an unknown episode, and it's just like
Perfect.
this,
Yep.
these cool things. And I said, I don't want to necessarily write a nonfiction book about those little tidbits, but it would be cool to spin some historical fiction around it, So,
Well, there's
that,
old guys who've done that whole genre, like
oh yeah,
Clive Cussler and
yeah,
even Dan
yeah,
Brown. That
exactly.
the Da Vinci
There's
Code is just so compelling for that same reason.
right, right, and that's what I think is was really cool about those, is that they found that blend between, okay, these were the facts of history that actually occurred as we know them, but maybe with just a tiny bit of a twist, we can give you this very plausible, entertaining,
Love it.
reality, or alternate reality. So yeah, so I've toyed around with anything and everything. I'm an admitted genre jumper. I like to. I think it helps my creativity to not stay in one particular genre by jumping around.
Perfect.
And yeah, but the military thriller is the one that landed. So that's what we're doing.
Perfect. Before we get into the instructor, I read it first. I loved it,
Well,
but
thank
I
you.
had a hard time with one thing.
Yeah, please. I want to hear what this is.
Well, actually, there's two things. I'll save the second
Okay,
one to the
okay.
end. So remind me. So, what is the difference for you between an action adventure novel
Mm,
and a thriller?
mm,
What is the difference? How do you, because I read your book and I go right away. This is sort of a mistake. And I go,
mm.
I think this is an ultimate action adventure novel for the simple reason. I'll tell you, because thrillers focus on creating and maintaining tension throughout the story, but action adventure novels prior or more priority is like physical action and
Hmm.
thrilling sequences like fights and chases,
Right.
daring escapes, in that. So just taking that regard and putting it into the instructor definition,
Yeah.
your novel. So I was like, wow, this is an action adventure novel, but but the pacing was of a thriller.
Right.
So
It's a great question, and I don't know if I've ever really evaluated it in that lens. So let's just do
okay,
it off the top of my head. But like, I think um in regards to it being a thriller, I think there's certain elements that make it so kind of content wise. I
okay,
think is a differentiator. You know, we're dealing with in the instructor, we're dealing with ill intent on the basis of a domestic terrorist group, you know, so that's
right,
more of like a thriller type topic. I think there's also um elements in the actual structure of the novel, plot twists and surprises and whatnot that are more relegated to the thriller side of the house versus an action adventure. When I think
right.
action adventure, I think like man against nature, or just like this
The five tropes that we used to have to memorize in
yeah,
school.
something like that,
Yeah,
but just like I don't think that you can't like they can't double up as kind of the same thing. Just how I perceive them in that divide is um what is the struggle of the protagonist or the characters as a whole. Is it the wagon train that's going out east on the Oregon Trail, and we're dealing with rattlesnakes and dysentery
yeah,
and hostile Native American tribes, like that is kind of like an action adventure in my eyes. Whereas on the thriller side, it's a little maybe darker, or
okay,
there's some more violence or negativity involved. Again, not that you can't have both in those.
yeah,
You can certainly have little Susie dying of dysentery in the Oregon Trail, and that's a really
yeah,
dark chapter.
yeah.
But that's kind of how I rationalize it in my
Okay,
head.
I did bounce back and forth throughout reading, going, oh, this is clearly a thriller novel because of A, B, C. And I
Yeah.
went, but he's not discovering a lost pyramid in the Amazon rainforest, but
Right.
he's still, it's about the protagonist. So before we go any further, tell me about Derek. Tell me about the protagonist. Tell me about the novel. Let's hear the cliff notes here.
So Derek is a retired Marine Corps warrant officer. He had a highly specialized job in the Marine Corps. They have essentially these um, intelligence gathering teams that are like highly sophisticated, and they're like the Marine Corps' versions of CIA case officers and espionage type guys. So he was one of those. Has an extensive background. Because of that background, he was attached to a lot of high action, high volatility units in the special forces community, special operations community. Uh, but he's a trained wilderness survival expert, and upon getting out of the Marine Corps, he kind of falls flat on what civilian life is like and the reintegration issues that hit him upside the head. In a short list, he's dealing with divorce from his wife, pending alienation from his young son, a father with early onset dementia, not having enough money to pay for everything, and just his own anger issues, his own kind of resentment towards civilian life, thinking that after 21, 22 years of the Marine Corps, everything should be gravy, and it's anything but, which many a veteran can attest to. um, so he starts his own survival school, and that's fledgling, that's on the verge of going under. But he gets approached by a individual who's part of a private group that wants to hire him for a month to train this private group in upstate New York. And they offer him an exorbitant amount of cash for just 30 days work. And because of the bills and everything and the alimony and child support and everything else, he has no choice but to take it. And it's in doing so, as he begins training these individuals, that he begins to suspect that they are up to no good. And
Yeah.
from there, hijinks ensue.
Um, so tell me a bit more about Derek per se. Like, was he? How did you go about developing the character from an author point of view? Was he
Yeah.
inspired by people you knew, or was he purely fictional, or a
No,
blend of
he's
both?
yeah, I mean, there is I think a blend of fiction in every character, for the most part, but for Derek himself, I based him off of three men. One was, I call him like my blueprint guy, who was or my foundation guy. But excuse me, good friend of mine, Rob, who very much fit the or was the profile that Derek was from a service standpoint, and from the wilderness survival standpoint, So he actually is the retired Marine warrant officer with the intel training, who was in the special operations community, who is a survival expert, and he and I were working together in a private investigation firm, and we were just kind of kicking around the idea of me writing a fictional book based off of his background. And Rob was very gracious. No one ever thought it was going to be what it was. It actually started as like a short story. And Rob was very gracious. He's like, yeah, you want to write, like, here's my career. He gave me like the Cliff Notes version of all the schools he attended and
Oh, excellent.
all the places he deployed to and was stationed at. And so that was like the schematics of Derek, the technical aspect.
Yeah.
um then a lot of the personality traits, the positive personality traits, I should say, are modeled after my father, man that I look up to, man that I dedicated the book to, um, man who sacrificed everything for his family, and still does to this day. So I took a lot of the emulation that I always had as a kid, and even now as an adult, looking up to him, and folded that into Derek, um as like the man that Derek wants to be, that he's striving to be. And then the third person is like the negative side of Derek, the anger and resentment and emotions and alcohol abuse and all the other shit that drags him down. And yeah, hi, that's me. I pulled that from personal experience, integrated that into there. It was part to add realism to the character, and part as like a cathartic process for myself, getting
Cool.
some of that stuff that I held inside out onto the page, and in doing so, it like expunges. So those are the three that made up Derek as the character.
Um, I'm also a writer. For those of you that haven't figured that out by now.
A very
Um,
good writer, by the way.
well, I'm yeah, it's
An excellent writer, by the way. Pick up his
oh,
books.
thanks, Tim. You know, I was single, but anyway, thank God I'm not.
Oh goodness.
Tell me about your
Woo!
writing process. What does it look like? Do you follow a strict routine, or are you flexible? You winging it? Are you do you fly by the seat of your pants? How does all of this work for you?
No, I've got a pretty set routine now at this point. I have toyed around with going against the grain, and that was not productive and beneficial. It was like three times the work of doing it the way I normally do. But
Yeah,
I kind of like mesh the two together. I call myself like a plotting pantser. So, like I have an overall outline of stuff that I want to do, major plot points,
right.
beginning, middle, end, what are the climactic parts and everything. I'm not like a traditionally trained, masters in fine arts thing. My hat's off to the people that are and have all these technical terms for, the fourth wall and the third phase, and I don't know any of that shit. I just
Yeah.
I just write, and I write cinematically. So it's like if I'm watching a movie and here's my 90 minutes or 2 hours for that movie. What are all the things that need to happen beginning to end to not only conclude your story, but keep people interested through the whole thing? And that's how I do it. So, I have my outline to kind of guide myself through the major plot. Um, but then I will kind of wing it and see, like, I'll go into a chapter knowing there's, okay, I need to accomplish one or two things here to move the
Yep.
story along. But other than that, I'm just letting the writing flow from me. I'm just letting the
Perfect.
dialogue develop the way it is. And I think that's a great way to give myself both structure, so I'm not going off into tangents and rabbit holes, but at the same time allow some authenticity to bleed in, but also it sparks imagination too, because you'll get, if you're just so strictly following a guideline that is so detailed it might as well be the book already.
Yeah.
You're never going to have those aha moments that, like, ooh, I could chain that together and I could do that, and like, ooh, what if we did that? So that's kind of like the balance that I find for myself.
Good. That's I'm sort of the same way. I can keep all those plot points and in my head, but I can't write it down. I watched a Kyle Mills interview, and he said he wrote, I think it was a 56,000 word outline,
Yeah.
basically, that before he even started the book. So he knew exactly what each chapter was going to be.
Yeah.
So I like, maybe I'm doing this wrong because I'm still new, so I'm learning. So I
Hmm.
wrote 26,000 words on one of my novels, and then 2 chapters in, I was off page, off tangent.
Yeah.
My character wouldn't have done that. So anyway, I keep it all in the back of my head, and then I write. I can't remember what I had for dinner yesterday, and if I go to the grocery store, you're out of luck.
Right.
There's not a chance I'm going to remember everything, but I can remember everything for a whole plot for a novel in the back of my
Yep.
head, right towards these goals. So in that we're somewhat similar, but that's good. Um, so for Derek, the character, he's real, man. Yeah, we felt for him, we cried for him,
Yeah.
we were happy for him. We were overjoyed when he overcame the end, and at the end of the novel, we were there's got to be more. I got to see more of this guy. With all that being said, who do you picture playing him when this goes to film? Now,
I like how
first,
you said when, not if,
nobody anywhere has said anything about I'm making that part up. So I'm
Right.
either I'm
Yes. Disclaimer
foreshadowing
out
here.
there. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going on the assumption it's good. So I'm going to go with that.
It's
So who's playing
funny.
this guy? Who's playing
Um,
Derek in the movies for you?
I was, I did a post on my Instagram. It's at Reed TR Hendricks. If you want to check it out. But when the Screen Actors Guild strike ended a couple weeks ago, I had this whole like post of like 3 or 4 different pictures that was me casting the instructor, and not that I was ranking them. They were all just like any one of these people could play the 4 main characters or the 5 main characters. So it was um, Derek, Marshall, Gil, Sarah, and
Yeah.
Kelly. Kelly's a
Right.
man for those who haven't read the book. So I had as my, I think, number one, if we were going to cast Derek as a Caucasian, because I never specify, I leave that up to the
Yeah.
reader,
Perfect.
to fill that in. But if we're going to cast him as a Caucasian, I liked Henry Cavill from Witcher and
Oh yeah.
Superman fame. He did a movie for Netflix called The Sandcastle, I believe, where he plays
Okay.
like a private contractor in Iraq, and he looks the part. I mean, he's awesome. So
Yeah.
he then, as a African American man, I liked Idris Elba very much for Derek role.
I could see that too. That'd be
Yeah, I think he'd knock it
Sorry,
out of
sorry,
the park.
Superman. I think, yeah,
Yeah, I really think he'd kill it. And then yeah, there's some other people have thrown out names. Hugh Jackman, I would sign up in a heartbeat because he's Wolverine, and
yeah,
Wolverine's my favorite. So and I think he would nail it. You got to have people that are physically imposing,
yeah.
but can access that breadth of emotions that Derek goes through,
Oh yeah.
from pure rage to crying to numb to just there's a lot that they would have to to
What?
display.
Well, we're nearing the end of our time here,
Yep.
but we have good news. The Instructor is not the end of your writing.
No.
This is only the beginning. So what is coming up next? And I'm guessing next April, 2024.
Correct. April 23rd, 2024 is the launch date for my sequel. It's called The Infiltrator. I actually just saw cover art for it this morning.
Oh,
It's looking pretty good. Yeah. So we're hoping to
nice,
get like the cover art reveal in the next few days, maybe like a, new year, new cover kind of launch type deal. Um,
excellent.
but yeah, it's called The Infiltrator. It basically picks up exactly where the events of the first one left off.
Back to back, or is there a time cap?
There's it's about
A
a
healing
year.
phase? He's
Well,
got some
yeah,
injuries to.
there's a year that's transpired, but
Okay,
I cover the stuff that's gone on in that year. So we pick it up where the conflict is really entering into its what's supposed to be its final phase. Whether it is or not, you'll have to read the book to find out.
sounds
um
good.
but yeah, it's a lot of expansion of the conflict beyond upstate New York. Now we're dealing with basically the entire East Coast and starting to make our way out west as so
Good. Well, thank you so much for taking a moment of your time to talk to me, and I, I can't wait for the next novel. So,
yeah, it's good. Great.
uh,
What was that second thing? Remember, you told me to remind you. You said there was two things that one was the
oh
action adventure versus thriller, and then there was a
yeah,
second thing.
we got literally 2 minutes. So,
Yeah, go.
um, how many
Lightning.
words was it when you first submitted it, and how many words was the Instructor on the end? Because that is one lean piece of work.
Yeah.
There's not an extra word in there. It is. It
Yeah,
is.
it was like 90,000 words when I first turned it in,
Yeah.
and I think it pretty much ended up right around like 93. There wasn't a whole
Wow.
much more. There was a lot of
That was.
rewriting, don't get me wrong, but it
Yeah.
all just kind of mashed up, so
Not a wasted word in there. It was beautiful. I really, that part I really enjoyed. You know, those
awesome.
pages or the paragraphs you tend to skip as a reader.
Yeah.
I'm just going to skip to the next part. There wasn't any of that for me. So
Well,
with
thank you.
that in mind, um, first we're going to I'm going to give away a novel, The Instructor, and
Yeah.
Tim's going to sign it, and we're going to ship it to you.
Yeah.
So the contest is going to be fairly simple. Uh, you're gonna have to follow me on Twitter. You're gonna have to follow Tim
Yep.
Hendricks on Twitter, and we're gonna put some extra links there. And you're gonna have to be a member of the Action Adventure. So, what would be a good question to ask? One question. We got a minute.
One
An answer.
question.
So they could have to maybe message me an answer.
Um, what is the tactical deficiency in the movie Braveheart with the Battle of Stirling?
Okay. Saturday night. I want to hear an answer. Thank you so much, guys.